Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ka Fateh. This is what we heard from the mouths of our politicians, whether it be Pierre Poilievre, Jody Gondek, Justin Trudeau, Jackie C, Daniel C. But what does it mean? I'm here with Dr. Paul Bullen. Dr. Paul Bullen is an expert on rhetoric, critical thinking, and religion. Dr. Paul, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So this was a phrase that we heard from all of the politicians. What does it mean? What do you make of them saying this, even when they're struggling to say it?
It's normal for politicians when they speak to a particular audience to learn something about it and then say something that will make them feel good, like happy to be in the great city of whatever, or if you're kind of Ich bin ein Berliner, which I guess is the name of a donut. But anyway, so and so on. So it's somewhat understandable that you want to make your audience happy. But sometimes it can go too far by saying slogans that have meanings beyond what they have any idea what they mean. And it's kind of unseemly, when people say, Slava Ukraini, glory to Ukraine. I mean, why are we saying glory to Ukraine? That's one thing, let's win the war or whatever. And same thing, this is a battle cry I gather from the 10th guy that we discussed on an earlier occasion. It's sort of like going into battle and shouting God, purity is God, or the victory is God's, and stuff like that. And then it's just, given that whole historical stuff, it's not clear why a Canadian politician should be saying that. I mean, we know why they say it, because somebody told them that they like to hear that, but it's really, I would say goes too far.
Well, doctor, if you think that goes too far, what do you make of politicians and police institutions participating in such parades where terrorists like Talwinder Singh Parmar is being glorified?
Well, I'm assuming, although others have disagreed, that most of these people don't realize who these other people are. They say, oh, the local ethnic group, let's go and show our support and march. But then the ethnic groups get stuff in there to connect the politicians, to legitimize them. And so, if you're India and you're looking at this separatist group that includes people, I gather, who are, non-controversially labeled terrorists, or, they must wonder what the hell's going on in Canada. It's one thing for the Khalistanis to do this, the Sikh separatists, but it's another thing for the Canadian politicians to do it. And the problem is the Canadian politicians are often kind of lured into doing it without quite knowing what they're getting involved in. So one advantage of having independent journalism, which we don't generally have, is they can say, for example, when the man came and spoke at the Parliament, and they said, and everybody plays him. Then someone pointed, well, he actually fought on the side of the Nazis. Well, that's good to know. I mean, whether that means you shouldn't let him speak, I don't know. But you need to have an independent, because politicians get involved in all kinds of stuff, and half the time they don't know what they're doing. So you have a critical press who says, well, we looked into this man and this and that, and then same thing. They say these slogans. Well, it's good to have an independent press that says, look, do you know what that slogan means? And or in the case of Ukraine, why are we saying glory? I mean, that sounds a bit like Sieg Heil, and same thing in this case. This is kind of so I think that's the problem. And I think that politicians would do better to not get to be it's one thing to turn up with a tie on and a suit and say, hello, dear fellow constituents. I know many of you are Sikhs and whatever, and say a few things. But you don't have to kind of join the club. You just are speaking as a Canadian representing the common good and the common country, and inviting them to be participants in it. But so there's a kind of pandering that goes too far. But sometimes they don't know. They don't know who these photographs. They have these series of photographs of people. I would say some of them have no idea who they are, but you can look into it, and then they can be smarter next time they do it. But I think generally they should stay away from getting involved in intense ethnic propaganda promotion and stuff like that. It's just not their role. But if they're the problem is if the conservative person wants to get the votes of the Sikhs, say in this case the Sikh, could be other groups, but and then the liberal wants it and the NDP wants it, they will each compete with each other to be more groveling and that sort of thing. So this is kind of a built-in kind of the incentive structure kind of is kind of a perverse incentive structure. And so there needs to be something in the common understanding about what is a seemly thing for a politician to do and what isn't, and what can an ethnic group or a faction or an interest group legitimately ask of a politician to do and what it can't.
So I covered this story where Talwinder Singh Parmar is being glorified. In the same parade, we have the police, military marching in that exact same parade.
Yes, I saw that.
Yeah. So, but the media is still silent on it. My videos have gotten hundreds of thousands of views.
Oh, I see.
I haven't seen anyone apologize yet.
If they didn't know before, they should theoretically know. Yes. Now know.
So when it comes to BLM, the police bends the knee.
Yeah.
When it comes to Khalistani terrorists, the police marches with them.
Yeah.
When it comes
and
to
pride parades,
pride parades, but when it comes to truckers, they give them the stick.
I think initially some of them actually supported it, but then the higher level people were horrified and shocked, and then kind of disciplined them for having a natural sense of support for the truckers.
What would be the negative effects to a society where the police are politicized in this way?
Well, that's the thing, is that I think there are certain institutions that should be neutral, and not because an individual member of the police or the military can't have an opinion, and maybe on their private time they can say whatever they want, but the institution as a whole needs to be, it certainly should not be politicized. Now, whether the politicians should be politicized, that's another matter. But even there, they should have some dignity and not go too far and not do cringeworthy or too much pandering. Yeah.
Would you say it's too much pandering to say, for example, the Premier of Alberta, Daniel Smith, says,
What?
The Sikhs literally built the foundations of this province.
Yeah, was that on X?
Yes.
Did it get any community notes? But they do. It is common for politicians to engage in that kind of hyperbole, like, well, America was literally built by the blacks, as though some of the white people had no role in the building of the United States. So, but that's why you need, in effect, community notes, and you're like Mr. Community Notes, and politicians are not, and media, in fact, the media sources are reluctant to acknowledge any error on their part. But it would be better to be just more honest. I think people would get more respect if there was that willingness to make a self-correction. Society is built up of many different groups that have their own interests. They're like what used to be called factions, and factions can be a real threat to the achievement of the common good. And the people in power are supposed to represent the common good, not one faction or another. And then they have to kind of, maybe like a symphony conductor and have all the factions some way work together for the total harmony of the good. So it should just be known that it is a problem, and that there's only so far you should go in trying to appease and pander to or be obsequious in front of interest groups, and that you should make it clear. I as an elected official or as a member of the police, whatever, I'm here to represent Canada, or I'm the province or the city or whatever, and that includes all sorts of people, and so I'm fully willing to be, familiar with all the different parts and say nice things, but there's a limit to how far you go. So, yeah.
Do you think they violated this limit?
I don't think the military or the police should be involved in ethnic parades. I mean, I guess like the St. Patrick's Day parade in the United States. So it's hard to tell people that because there's this natural tendency to want to be part of the society itself. But I do think there is a role for people who say, we don't have to get involved every parade. We don't need to investigate who all the photographs are. You can do your thing, and the media, if they have some want to point some things out, it's okay. But I don't think the military, the police, even the elected officials. However, the problem is the current incentive structure provides reasons why they want to do it. So we've got to have some way to kind of offset that. I think, maintain some dignity and
So you're basically saying the lack of judgment on part of politicians and institutions that are supposed to be independent reaches to a point where their dignity gets questioned.
Yes, I mean it is very odd to see as one of your previous videos where each of the parties puts a little, I don't know what that thing is, but something on their head, and then that's not a turban. I don't know what it is. Well, it's kind of like a workout turban or something, but there's a similar thing where the American politicians will go to Jerusalem and some of them will start sobbing at the Wailing Wall. Like that's what happened with the Prime Minister of Argentina went there and started crying at the Wailing Wall. But this is all motivated. It's not like they naturally do that. They do it because they're trying to appeal to a certain constituency. And it's difficult because it's a bit like the race for the bottom, where there's a perverse instructive structure with a vicious cycle where they compete. Who can be more pro-Sikh than the other, or pro-whatever group it is. So how you can introduce, I suppose one thing is if there's a report like from you where you say, look, do you realize what was in that parade? Sometimes in the pride parades, there's some stuff there that you really want to be associated with that? That might make them think twice about mindlessly participating in some function like this.
Well, politicians and the police organizations that participate this type of events, they call them religious events. So they clock.
As opposed to political, you mean?
Yeah. So they.
Oh, so therefore, this was not a religious. This was not a political thing. But it's very hard to make the case that the Khalistani and the Sikhs are not political. But that was the way they did it. You're saying.
Let me ask you about that.
Oh yeah, okay.
It was said to be a religious event,
Yeah.
but I saw thousands of Khalistan flags in a religious event. Why do you have India's prime minister in a jail suit?
Oh yeah, no, exactly. First of all, the fact that it's religious, that's a pretty subtle, fine distinction there. So that's what usually happens when there's hypocrisy. Is you say, well, in this case it's a little bit different because, but. I think they should just not be involved with these things at all. Why should But they're constantly trying to get votes. So but that is the problem. So we can see that's a problem of the incentive to get involved in pandering and doing everything. But that's why there's going to be, as they say, pushback by somebody saying, "Look, do you realize what's going on here? Are you really? Why would you associate with the military, the Boy Scouts, or whatever was there?" With this thing, it's just.
So let me ask you this, if I may. You studied religion.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Is the Sikh religion today considered extremist?
It does seem, as far as religions go, unusually political. In the same way that in Islam you have the Islamists, which are called political Islam. They have an extremist. Every religion has its kind of fringes and stuff like that. So it does have an extremist element. I can't say for certainty how deep it is and how wide it is. But whenever you see these events, they're always pushing this separatist country, and that doesn't seem like a very religious subject to me. That sounds like political, and I don't know if I want to say they're extremist, but some of them are. Clearly, some of them are. The ones who blow up airplanes and that sort of thing. So, extremism. That's another one of these words that's can be easily misused. But usually, extremist means that they're maybe tending towards violence, or they're disruptive, or they are not very reasonable. And in terms of religion, you would think the main focus of the religion would be on the soul and the salvation of the individual and but they seem to be, their mind seems to be on other things, which is more political. So, yeah.
Well, I want to ask you a question about the media. When I covered this event in Calgary, the mainstream media only covered it from an aspect of the impact the event is going to have on local traffic.
Oh.
And how wonderful it was to see the police and everyone march together.
Well, that's right. I mean, but can you imagine a Canadian legacy media funded by the government engaging in a critique of Sikhism? I mean, they wouldn't even. They would just. It's not even something they were allowed to even think about. So therefore, there's a kind of built-in superficiality to the regular media. I mean, and they're trying to make that so that it has to be the case outside the regular media by having these hate speech laws and limits and all that stuff. But they're just not willing to engage in that kind of analysis. I mean, as I mentioned before, they did have a thing when there was there's some kind of commemoration every year on the date of the bombing of the air flight India 182, and then they did have a report on that. And I said before, they were upset about that. The regular journalists. My goodness, Canadians, we interviewed Canadians and they don't even know that this happened and this is the biggest terrorist event. And then their big conclusion was the only reason we didn't know about it was because it was full of people who are of Indian descent and therefore Canadians didn't care that they all got blown up. Well, in this entire report about the ignorance of the Canadians about this important event, they not once mentioned that there was any connection between that thing and the Sikhism. There was no mention about the Golden Temple or the killing of Indira Gandhi. You just can't get that kind of analysis because they're afraid to say anything that will offend. Now, they'll offend certain groups because certain groups are open season, but not ethnic groups, and especially ones the more the number is, the more they have influence, and they have a lot of influence. So the media should do that sort of thing, but the media, the so-called mainstream media, it's just not capable of that. I think. Yeah.
I found something you said interesting. You said there's an open season on certain. Who are these groups?
Well,
I don't want to sound like I'm a reactionary, but no. In other words, you can. For example, there was this thing about. Oh my God, we did a sonar thing of this land that's next to a church on the Indian reservation, and we saw something. It must be bones. Oh my God, there was a mass murder, a mass killing, and the bodies were dumped in there. And then it's how it spreads throughout the country. And suddenly you've got the prime minister apologizing for the mass murder of a Canadian Indian people, and go on and on and on. And there were churches were burnt down, all this stuff, and Catholic churches and other churches. Well. And then every reporter was coming up with new things. It's just so sad about all the residential schools and how terrible they were. You can go overboard and come up with complete fabrications with no evidence whatsoever, and it can go on for years, and nobody will ever acknowledge that not one bone has ever been found, and that the whole story was a hoax. But that's okay because then you're going against the evil white settlers and stuff. And so on. There's that. Given the political climate, certain people you're allowed to criticize at great length, and so you'll have things like the New York Times had a big thing on photography is racist, and so it's walking dogs is a white man's activity. So those sorts of things are okay. Or that in Vancouver they had a thing where it says anti-Asian. It is the anti-Asian hate crime capital of the world, and it was all based on some very dubious little statistics that they had. So that kind of you can go on and on and on and invent stuff, but when somebody blows up an airplane and engages in separatist activity and is threatening the leader of India, which is a rather important foreign partner. You don't want to say anything because there's that kind of talk about hypocrisy and double standards. that's there too. So, yeah.
The leader of the Conservative Party recently visited a campground where he was photographed, and on the wen there was a little painting of a flag that is recognized as Diagolon.
Yeah. And that was all, and it turned out to be basically a myth, right? Isn't it?
Well,
hoax?
People refer to it as a joke.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. Trudeau called him out like this, saying, oh, you're doing this and that. And what did the Diagolon ever did in this country? They're not on a list. They're not anything. The people that I met so far.
Oh, you met some of them?
Yes, I met some of them. They are just, regular people. But Trudeau took stabs at Pierre for hanging out with Diagolon, that's so-called white nationalists. But then they both Trudeau and Pierre went to a Sikh national event where they both wear the turban, they took the knee, and then India...
It wasn't just a matter, there was a picture in the background, it was
slogans, etc.
And it wasn't like accidental.
So this event caused the Indian government to express their disapproval, but neither Pierre nor Trudeau would call each other out on this.
So it is a case of a bit like a case of the Uni Party thing, where the only kind of competition has to come from something outside the Uniparty. And there are probably other people that do it, but independent media is one of the places. No, just that it gives rise to the more general problem of, and even Aristotle discussed. Aristotle has a thing on immigration to colonies and stuff, and he said, we've got to be careful with immigration. And he would discuss under what conditions immigration could be a threat to the colony and what not. So he viewed it as a. He wasn't saying you shouldn't have immigration, but he says if you do it in a clumsy way, you'll end up having all kinds of trouble. So a country, especially like Canada, which has encouraged this so-called multiculturalism, needs to have something that offsets that fragmenting element by representing Canada as such, and Canada. And the common good, that is to say, what transcends all the factions. And so I think the subject you're raising ties into that more general problem and of a political theory and a public policy attitude that says, look, we're now, whether it was a good idea from the beginning or not, the die has been cast, as they say, as Shakespeare said, or the dice have been thrown. We now have to deal with the situation, so we need to have something. These are like centrifugal forces, these different ethnic and factional groups and interest groups, and and you need to have something which offset that as maybe a centrifugal. Anyway, something that unifies it, and there needs to be something that represents the common good, and not just all these different factional interests. So that really needs to be worked on, and I'm fairly confident there must be political theorists and others. I don't know, what's his name, Charles Taylor, the great Canadian philosopher. Great philosopher who happens to be Canadian, who taught at McGill for a long time. Really a brilliant man. He wrote on multiculturalism, and I'd be interested to know what he said on this subject. I actually asked him a question about it once, before he wrote his book. And so there must be some thinkers who have addressed this and have said, have given some kind of attitude, but it does seem like it's necessary.
Dr. Bullen, thank you very much for participating in this interview.
You're welcome.
I appreciate your time very much.
No problem at all.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoyed this interview, please consider going to mediabezirgan.com/donate to support my independent journalism so that I can bring you more interviews with more experts on the topics that we discuss, where we find no other media doing the work. Thank you.